Okay, so get ready because we're going to dive into something pretty fascinating, I think.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be looking at what's happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo,
Okay.
specifically how the conflict there
Right.
is impacting something that you probably use every single day,
Mm-hmm.
your smartphone.
Wow.
You wouldn't believe this.
Uh,
There's this metal called tantalum,
Oh,
and let's just say it's causing quite a stir.
it is. You're absolutely right. And it goes way beyond just your phone, too.
Really?
We're talking economics, armed groups, and the ethical sourcing of materials on like a global scale.
Wow.
What happens thousands of miles away really does end up affecting us.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about that.
Yeah.
So tantalum, I'll admit, I had no clue what it was before we started doing this deep dive, but
Yeah.
apparently it's like crucial for our tech to even work.
It is. And you know what's fascinating is that this tiny metal,
Mm-hmm.
often weighing less than half a garden pea,
Mm-hmm.
is essential for things like smartphones and other electronics to even function.
Hold on, less than half a garden pea.
Yeah. How do they even mine something that small?
It's a complex process for sure.
I bet.
Tantalum has these unique properties. It can hold a high charge for its size, and it works in a crazy range of temperatures.
Wow.
This makes it perfect for the tiny capacitors in our devices that store energy.
Okay.
But its origin story is a lot less glamorous.
Okay, so tiny but mighty metal. Got it.
Yeah.
But what's the connection to the conflict in Congo?
Well, the Democratic Republic of Congo is actually one of the biggest sources of tantalum in the world.
Okay.
And the eastern region of the country where a lot of the mining happens is right in the middle of a really intense conflict.
Yeah, we've all seen the headlines about the conflict in DRC,
Right.
but I never realized it could be linked to my phone. It's
Ah.
kind of unsettling.
It is. And the actions of a rebel group called M23 really bring that connection to light.
Okay.
They've been taking over more and more territory.
Oh, wow.
And last year, they captured a town called Rubaya.
Rubaya.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why is that place so important? Rubaya is like the heart of the coltan industry in Congo.
Okay.
Coltan is the ore from which tantalum is extracted.
Wait a minute. So the rebels now control a big chunk of the tantalum that ends up in our phones.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
And they're not just controlling the area, they're actively making a profit from the mines.
Really?
They've basically set up their own little government in Rubaya.
Oh, gosh.
We're talking permits for miners and traders' fees for everyone, and they've even doubled the wages of the miners to keep them working under their control.
That's crazy.
It's a disturbing situation.
It doesn't sound like your average rebel group operation. It
Yeah.
sounds more like they're running a business.
That's a good way to put it, and it's a very profitable one.
Jeez.
The UN estimates that the M23 makes around $800,000 every month just from mining coltan in Rubaya.
$800,000 a month?
Yeah, that's money that's very likely being used to keep the conflict going. To put it in perspective, that kind of money could buy a lot of weapons and supplies.
Wow. So the smartphones we use could be indirectly funding an armed group in a conflict zone.
It's possible.
That's a really disturbing thought.
It is, and it raises some big questions about the stuff we use every day and the human cost behind it.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget that there are real people working in really tough conditions to make this technology possible.
Absolutely. You mentioned that the mines in this region aren't run by big companies, but by individuals.
Right.
What are the conditions like for the miners?
The working conditions in those Congolese mines are incredibly dangerous and basically unregulated.
Really?
Imagine thousands of people digging in these open pits that just scar the landscape, or even working underground in incredibly unsafe tunnels.
Wow.
It's a stark contrast to the high-tech world of the gadgets they're helping to create.
It's pretty hard to imagine.
Yeah.
So how does this coltan mined in a conflict zone actually get into our phones?
Well,
Aren't there rules in place to prevent that?
you're right. In 2010, the U.S. passed the Dodd-Frank Act, and the EU has similar legislation aimed at tackling this very problem, the conflict minerals problem.
Okay, so how do these regulations work?
They're all about accountability.
Okay.
They're designed to force companies to look at their supply chains and make sure that the tantalum, tungsten, and gold, the conflict minerals they're buying, aren't being used to fund armed groups.
Right.
It's all about sourcing materials ethically.
That sounds promising. So
Yeah.
problem solved, right?
If only it were that simple.
Oh,
Tracking where these minerals come from is incredibly complex.
I bet.
There's a certification system called the Innovative Tin Supply Chain Initiative,
Okay.
or ITSCI for short.
ITSCI.
Yeah.
Okay.
So ITSCI is supposed to guarantee that the minerals are conflict-free.
Okay, so problem solved.
Well, again, if only it were that simple.
Oh, no.
There are some serious concerns about how effective it actually is.
Like, what are the issues?
Well, think about it. There are tons of these small-scale mines all over this massive region.
Right.
Monitoring every single one of them is a huge challenge.
Yeah.
And then there's the potential for corruption.
Oh, gosh.
There have been accusations of state agents literally selling ITSCI tags to traders so they can falsely label minerals as conflict-free.
So even with all these regulations and this certification system, it sounds like there are still ways for these conflict minerals to slip through the cracks.
You got it. And that brings us to the role of Rwanda in all of this.
Rwanda, don't they have their own coltan mines?
They do, but there's evidence that they're actually helping export coltan from those M23 controlled areas in the DRC.
How is that even possible?
Well, the UN has tracked the route this coltan takes from the rebel-controlled mines to the Rwandan border, where it's loaded onto trucks.
Wow.
It seems like they're mixing it with their own coltan, essentially contaminating the entire supply chain.
So not only is M23 profiting from this, but Rwanda might be as well.
It's a complicated situation.
Yeah.
Rwanda denies any involvement, saying they have their own large-scale coltan mining and refining operations.
Yeah.
They claim they have nothing to do with the conflict minerals from the DRC.
So who's telling the truth?
Right.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces are missing.
It's definitely a challenge. Rwanda's government spokesperson, Yolande Makolo, has been very vocal, saying it's cynical to twist a community's struggle for rights into a story about making money off materials.
But their coltan exports have gone way up recently, right?
Yeah.
That can't be a coincidence.
Exactly. The U.S. Geological Survey reported a 50% jump in their exports between 2022 and 2023. It's pretty hard to believe that all of that extra coltan came solely from Rwandan mines, especially with this conflict going on right next door.
Okay, so we have regulations trying to stop the trade of these conflict minerals.
Yeah.
But it sounds like some countries might be finding ways to get around them and profit from the situation.
It's possible.
It's all a bit overwhelming, to be honest.
It's a lot to take in. I know it raises some uncomfortable questions about how effective international efforts really are in addressing this issue, and it definitely highlights the challenges companies face in making sure their supply chains are truly ethical.
Speaking of companies, what about the big tech giants using tantalum in their products?
Yeah.
Are they doing anything to address this?
Well, the Congolese government actually took legal action against Apple in France and Belgium last year, claiming they were using conflict minerals.
Seriously, that's a bold move.
It is. Apple denied those allegations and said they stopped sourcing tantalum from both the DRC and Rwanda because it was just too difficult to guarantee it was conflict-free.
So they just pulled out completely.
Seems like it, and this raises another big question. How are other companies handling this issue?
Right.
And how much are they telling us about where they get their materials from?
Uh-huh.
I mean, let's be honest, most of us buy a new smartphone without any clue about the complicated and potentially unethical journey that little piece of tantalum inside has been on.
It definitely makes you think twice, doesn't it? What about all the other materials in our phones like cobalt in batteries or those rare earth minerals in the screens? Could we be unintentionally contributing to conflict and suffering just by using our phones?
That's the million-dollar question. And unfortunately, there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
But by understanding these global supply chains and asking the right questions, we can start making better choices as consumers and pushing for companies to be more transparent.
You know, this is giving me flashbacks to that whole blood diamonds thing.
Uh-huh.
Remember how the diamond industry had to clean up its act after all those human rights abuses?
Right.
Do you think something like that could happen with conflict minerals?
It's definitely possible that Blood Diamond campaign was super effective.
Yeah.
It showed the power of consumers speaking up and demanding change in a really entrenched industry.
But diamonds are a luxury, right?
Yep.
Smartphones are practically essential these days.
Yeah, true.
Do you really think people would be willing to pay more for a phone that's ethically sourced?
That's a good point. But I think there are more and more people who care about ethical sourcing, even if it means spending a little extra. And as technology gets better, it'll be easier to trace where materials come from, which could make ethical sourcing more feasible on a larger scale.
It does seem like conscious consumerism is becoming more of a thing.
Yeah.
People are paying attention to the impact of their choices, from the food they eat to the clothes they wear.
Exactly. I think that trend is here to stay.
Yeah.
The more connected we are globally, the more we realize that our actions have consequences and we have a responsibility to make good choices.
So it seems like even something as small as a smartphone can be connected to all sorts of complex global issues. It's mind-boggling, really.
It's a reminder that Even the little choices we make can have huge consequences, often in places we never even think about.
Well, this has been a real eye-opener for me. We've covered so much ground already.
I know, right?
From the conflict in the DRC to the role of Rwanda, the challenges of certification, and the responsibility of consumers and corporations.
Yeah, we've barely scratched the surface.
I think we need to take a moment to let all of this sink in.
Yeah.
We'll be back in just a moment to continue our deep dive into the world of conflict minerals. You might be thinking, with all these efforts to stop conflict minerals, like, how does this even happen if
Yeah.
Rwanda's denying involvement? Why did Apple stop sourcing tantalum from them?
Yeah.
It just doesn't add up.
It is curious, isn't it? It seems like Apple wasn't convinced about the traceability of Rwandan tantalum, even if it wasn't directly coming from those rubble-controlled areas.
Right.
It probably just seemed too risky for them, both from an ethical standpoint and for their reputation.
Makes sense. I guess when you're a company as big as Apple, any hint of controversy can really hurt.
Oh, absolutely. Especially these days with everyone so focused on ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors.
Right.
Companies are under a lot of pressure to prove they're sourcing their materials ethically.
Okay, so where does that leave us, it feels like? Even if we want to make ethical choices as consumers, it's almost impossible to know for sure where the materials in our products are coming from.
It is frustrating, I'll give you, that the lack of transparency in so many supply chains makes it incredibly difficult for consumers to make truly informed decisions.
So what can we do about it? Are we just stuck in this cycle of unknowingly supporting these conflicts?
Not necessarily. There are a few things you can do.
Okay.
First, support organizations that are working to make mineral supply chains more transparent and hold those involved accountable.
Okay.
There are some amazing NGOs out there doing some serious investigative work and exposing these issues.
That's a good starting point. What else can we do?
Put pressure on the companies themselves.
Okay.
Ask them directly where their materials come from, what steps they're taking to ensure they're conflict-free, and what certifications they have. Companies respond to consumer demand. If enough people start asking these questions, it can force real change in the industry.
So it's about using our voices and our wallets to make a difference.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of staying informed. The more you understand these complex issues, the better equipped you'll be to make a difference.
Knowledge is power, as they say.
Yeah.
You know, this whole conversation is reminding me of the Blood Diamonds campaign.
Yeah.
The diamond industry was forced to clean up its act after years of human rights abuses.
Right.
Do you think something similar could happen with conflict minerals?
I think it's definitely within the realm of possibility. The Blood Diamond campaign was incredibly successful in raising awareness and pushing for change.
Yeah.
It proved that consumers can have a real impact even on industries that have been operating in a certain way for decades.
That's encouraging, but diamonds are a luxury, right? Smartphones are practically a necessity in today's world.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you really think people are willing to pay more for an ethically sourced phone?
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a growing number of consumers who are willing to prioritize ethics, even if it costs a bit more. And as technology evolves, tracking the origin of materials will become easier, which could make ethical sourcing more realistic on a larger scale.
I can see that there's definitely a growing trend of conscious consumerism. People are becoming more aware of the impact of their choices, from the food they buy to the clothes they wear.
Exactly. And I think that trend is only going to get stronger as our world becomes more interconnected. We're also becoming more aware of how our actions are interconnected and the responsibility that comes with that.
So if we've learned anything from this deep dive, it's that something as small as a smartphone can be linked to this incredibly complex web of global issues. It's eye-opening, to say the least.
It really is. And it's a powerful reminder that the choices we make, even seemingly small ones, can have a big impact far beyond what we can see.
It is a lot to think about. Is there anything else you think we should consider about this situation?
I think it's important to remember that focusing solely on the role of consumers can sometimes overshadow the responsibility of governments and corporations.
Can you expand on that a bit?
Sure, while consumer pressure is important, governments have a major role to play.
Right.
They need to enforce regulations, promote transparency, and hold corporations accountable for their actions.
And what about the corporations themselves? What role do they play?
They have a responsibility that goes beyond simply complying with regulations.
Okay.
They need to be proactive in ensuring their supply chains are ethical, invest in due diligence, and be open about where they source their materials.
So it sounds like we need a multifaceted approach with consumers, governments, and corporations all stepping up and taking responsibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not about pointing fingers at any one group, but about recognizing that we all share a responsibility in tackling this complex issue.
That's an important point. It's easy to feel helpless as an individual, but when we work together, we can actually make a difference.
I couldn't agree more. And remember, this isn't just about conflict minerals. This situation is a microcosm of the larger challenges we face with globalization when it comes to ethical sourcing and responsible consumption.
So you're saying this deep dive is just the tip of the iceberg?
Precisely. And it's a conversation that needs to continue. We all need to be a part of it.
This has been incredibly insightful. We've covered so much: the conflict in the DRC, the role of Rwanda, the difficulties with certification, and the responsibility of both consumers and corporations.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
I think we need to take another quick pause here to process all this information. When we come back, we'll wrap up our deep dive with some final thoughts and key takeaways for our listeners. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into conflict minerals. I feel like we've been on like a whirlwind tour of information about tantalum, the Congo, Rwanda, and all the crazy complexities of these global supply chains.
Yeah, it's a lot to absorb,
It definitely has been for me.
for sure. But hopefully it sparks some new thoughts about like the true cost of the technology that we use every day.
It definitely has for me. So as we wrap up, what are the key takeaways you want listeners to remember from this deep dive?
I think the biggest one is that your everyday choices as a consumer have ripple effects that go way beyond what you might even imagine.
Yeah.
That smartphone in your pocket is connected to a web of global issues, conflict, human rights, and environmental sustainability, just to name a few.
Yeah, it really drives home the point that we're not just like passive consumers, we're active participants in a global system.
Exactly. And that means we have a responsibility to be informed and to make conscious decisions about what we buy and how we use technology.
Okay, so given all this information, how can we as individuals actually make a difference in a situation this complex?
Well, it starts with staying informed.
Okay.
Read articles, listen to podcasts, do your own research. Educate yourself about these issues surrounding conflict minerals and ethical sourcing.
Right.
The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to make informed choices.
Knowledge is power, as they say. What else can we do?
Don't be afraid to speak up. Ask questions, demand transparency from the companies you buy from, and support stronger regulations and enforcement from governments.
So it's about being proactive and holding companies and governments accountable for their actions.
Absolutely. And remember, you're not alone in this.
Yeah.
There are lots of organizations and individuals working on these issues. Find them, support them, get involved. Be part of the solution.
It's easy to get overwhelmed by like the size of these problems,
Yeah.
but I think your point about collective action is crucial.
Yeah.
Even small actions, when multiplied by thousands or even millions of people, can create real change.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of your own purchasing decisions.
Okay.
Choose to support companies that are committed to ethical sourcing and transparency. Every dollar you spend is a vote.
So it's about being mindful consumers and making choices that align with our values, but beyond just individual action. What about like the bigger picture?
That's where the conversation about systemic change comes in.
Okay.
We need to look beyond individual responsibility and consider how we can create a more just and sustainable system overall.
What would that kind of systemic change look like?
Well, it would involve things like stricter international regulations on mineral sourcing,
Right.
increased transparency and accountability in supply chains, and a shift towards more sustainable and ethical manufacturing practices.
So it's about moving away from a system that prioritizes profit above all else
Yeah,
and towards one that values human rights and environmental sustainability.
exactly. It's a big shift, but it's one that's becoming increasingly necessary as we grapple with the consequences of globalization and our ever-growing consumption.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. It's been a journey, and I've learned a lot about the hidden world behind the technology we use every day.
And that's what a deep dive is all about, isn't it? And it's about uncovering those hidden connections, challenging our assumptions, and giving us the knowledge to make better, more informed choices.
Exactly. So the next time you pick up your smartphone, think about that tiny piece of tantalum inside. Think about the miners, the conflict, the complex supply chains, and the role we all play as consumers, and let's use this knowledge to push for positive change both individually and collectively.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Remember, every choice we make, no matter how small, has the power to make a difference.
And that's the power of a deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep looking for those deeper connections.